That's lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you for all coming. It was a lovely day out there. So your time here is really valuable to us, and thank you for giving up your time. I've been doing this quite a while. I kind of got into it in the early 2000s. I was working in the corporate world, and I could see the deception going on. And I worked for big corporations like Microsoft, and saw the way that the intelligent world was coming to us. And I worked on one project. Bill Gates came and approved the installation that I put in Chelsea, and it was a mini smart city. It was a really sort of a rehash of a smart city. It was it was a walk-through experience of a smart city, and it was then that I really woke up. And subsequently, I did work for Google and GlaxoSmithKline, the really bad people. But it was a learning experience for me, and I realised how bad it was, and I got out and began to do this. So here we are. And when I started researching it, I realised that there was this Agenda 21 at the time. It was brought about in 1992, and that actually this was the Trojan Horse. This was the way they were going to create this mad world that we're now living in. And it was a big revelation to me, because so many people called me crazy on the way. And I now know that I wasn't crazy. So, leaving that world behind me, they still think I'm crazy, but we don't. So that's what matters. The United Nations Agenda 21, it's a 42-chapter document. You can get it on Amazon. And it really walks you through how global governance is really the way forward, that they want a one world government, one world currency, one world bank, one world language, one world religion, one world everything. It really is a way of bringing this whole thing in. It was launched at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. It's also called Sustainable Development. On the face of it, it talks about sustainability, being, sort of the main thing. It talks about environmentalism, but unfortunately, it's not environmentalism. It's actually all about control. It's nothing to do with environmentalism. And what happened is that it really is, they talk about conservation, but at its heart, it seeks to remove man from nature. And put a man into an urban environments called smart cities, and to really take control of the countryside, of the rural areas and the land, because that's where the resources lie. And this is a global thing. This has been happening for years and years. The global plunder of resources, because at the end of the day, money doesn't really exist, and they know that. And what does exist is the resources of our planet, and that's what these organisations seek to control. Now, there were 3 Club of Rome documents. The Club of Rome was instrumental in this. I mean, actually, I won't do that bit yet. I'll do the Technocracy Movement, because this wasn't a new idea. This was the Technocracy Movement of the 1930s really brought this issue to the fore, and it really was seeded at Columbia University in the 1930s with a bunch of sort of political scientists and I suppose they were engineers. It was all to do with technology. There was a guy called M.K. Hubbard and Howard Scott, and they were scientists, political scientists. That was M.K. Hubbard, and Howard Scott was the engineer. They proposed a replacement of capitalism with an energy-based economy as opposed to a price-based economy. This was reintroduced by the Trilateral Commission. Zbigniew Brzezinski introduced it in 1973 as the new economic order known as sustainable development and the green economy. And that, at that time in Columbia University, it was a hotbed of technocratic thinking, and weirdly, Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was involved in the push of the technocracy movement. He was very, very. He even had his social credit party organised. And there was a massive push to get this done. By 1947, they really did a one last push to get this really going, and it failed. There was they had a massive convoy of cars that went from Vancouver to California to Vancouver, stopping at every Masonic temple on the way, to promote what they called Operation Columbia, which was this whole social credit movement, using carbon credits as the economy, which is exactly what we're seeing now. So it's quite interesting how history does repeat itself. So that kind of died a death because the Second World War kicked in, and I think people had really, that they suddenly saw that this could be something that they didn't want to let go of capitalism quite at that point, and people just sort of abandoned it because it was too radical for its time. But it seems that now is kind of the right time to do it. I mean that they've had a long time since. I think 1973 is when Zbigniew Brzezinski kind of ignited this ideology, and he wanted to bring this up again as the new economic order, which is what we're living with now, really. So the Club of Rome really pushed a lot of the Club of Rome were they were a think tank, a global think tank for the United Nations, and they were founded in 1968 at the Rockefeller's private estate in Bellagio, Italy, by Aurelio Pecci, an Italian industrialist, and it was the Rockefeller Foundation owned that estate, and these Club of Rome reports are really brought forward by the Rockefeller Foundation and the United Nations. They funded it all. The main purpose for the Club of Rome is to formulate a crisis through which the world could be united under a sort of a one world government. So, it was almost like problem, reaction, solution. We need a crisis so we can come up with a solution for whatever we need. And that's what they did. And so the very first... this was way before the Earth Summit. This was in 1972. They published this Club of Rome report called Limits to Growth. Now, this was all about population and population control versus resources. And they used a lot of computer modelling and really decided, put out wild predictions about how there wouldn't be enough resources to go around, there wouldn't be enough food, resources on the planet. By 1980, we'd all be starving and, it would all be terrible. And there was a lot of so this kind of thinking around the 1970s. It was really quite a Malthusian sort of ideology that we'd be in dire straits, and that we had to do something about it. And this was really because it served these people who'd set up the Club of Rome and the United Nations to do so. So these are all commissioned by the United Nations to the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome executed it, but these Club of Rome reports were really commissioned by the United Nations. So there's a lot of Malthusian thought going on at that time. There was a book called The Population Bomb by a guy called Paul Ehrlich that came out at the same time, roughly, and he again really sort of got that going, and that whole sort of ideology of we've got to do something about population. It needs to be reduced and it needs to be controlled, and otherwise we're all going to go to hell in a handbasket, basically. So that's what they did. They said it would be the collapse of society if this was allowed to continue. After that came a lot of habitat conferences by the United Nations, and this really interested me because I was going through some of these habitat conferences, and this was really by Professor Len Gertler for the Centres for Human Settlements. You see, they had this idea that we needed to concentrate the humans into settlements. You know, we can't let them be roaming around the countryside. They've got to be in the settlements. And he said land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of the accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. This is where we get the communitarian thing coming in, because this Marxist thinking that private property ownership is actually unjust. So if unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Well, sustainable development, it's in the way of sustainable development. Social justice, urban renewal and development, the provision of decent dwellings can only be achieved if land is used in the interests of society as a whole. So we're talking about collectivism, and this is where this whole thing really, what's behind this, it's global communism. And so I thought that was really interesting, because that was about the same time all these habitat conferences started bubbling up. And this is Zbigniew Brzezinski, who, bit of a mouthful. He worked for his Trilateral Commission, and he wrote this book, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technocratic Era. And he also was at Columbia University with M.K. Hubbard and Howard Scott. And he was key in forming the new economic order, the resource-based economy, CO2 carbon taxing, the technocratic age. They must be controlled and owned. That's us, by the way. So they sort of rolled on with all these different habitat conferences and world conferences on population, and some of them were they held a lot of sort of conferences to lead up to the next Club of Rome report, and this one was Our Common Future, that was published in 1987, and this was really. It was called the Report on the World Commission on Environment and Development by Gro Harlemland in 1987, she was the Prime Minister of Norway at the time. And she said, wealth needs to be distributed from wealthy countries to the poorest nations, as wealthy countries are destroying the planet. You know, this was the ideology. So it was it was a second Marshall Plan, really, so that money from the West would go over to India and China, to equalise. It was all about equality or equity. It's different from equality. It was about economic equity between countries, which sounds very, very worthy, actually, at the time. You know, it's a nice thing to do. Bring up the third world. We were the polluting West. You know, we needed to, sort of make reparations. But actually, it didn't quite work out like that, because it funded this. The poorer countries were used to really fund the whole tech industry, and now we have India and China belching out emissions where we are being sanctioned. And all this came to light at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, when Lord Monckton of Brenchley, I mean, he was a great bloke. He gave his address to the Paris Climate Conference, saying, "Look, this is unfair. We've given all our money over to India and China. All our industry went over there. Our industry was plummeted, at that time, and we ended up financing all of the industry for India and China, and they're now pushing out. They have nuclear power. They're pushing out lots and lots of emissions, and yet we, the West, are being sanctioned, and there was something horribly wrong, and that was to take away from the Paris Climate Conference anyway." Yes, it was a communitarian plan. This was it's almost like a communitarian Bible. It ended up sort of really, we had to meet the third world. It came under scrutiny during the Paris Climate Conference, and and even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Maurice Strong, who set up the Earth Summit, called it the second Marshall Plan. This was their way of bringing this communitarian economy in. And then the last one was this book here called it's called The First Global Revolution. It's a bit tatty now because I've had it for years. And again, this was brought about just before the Earth Summit in 1991. And this was their way of that they had to find a common enemy in order to unite humanity with a crisis. And this was the book where they invented global warming, because it says in here, and we know that that global warming is being used to push this global control. And in here, there's a few quotes, and one of them is it's very telling. It says, "The need for enemies seems to be a common historical factor. States have striven to overcome domestic failures and internal contradictions by designating external enemies. The scapegoat practice is as old as mankind itself. When things become too difficult at home, divert attention by adventure abroad. Bring the divided nation together to face an outside enemy, either a real one or one else invented for the purpose." So the traditional enemies had gone away. The Cold War was over, the First and Second World Wars were over, and they were short of a common enemy. And they found the enemy they needed, and this is it. "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, and water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands a solidarity of all people. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself." So they designated us as the enemy of humanity by making up a threat, which was global warming. And we know this now, but in those days we weren't aware. Now, we had that was 1991. Now, in 1991, the then Prince Charles took the Royal Yacht Britannia into Rio de Janeiro harbour because they were planning to have the 1992 Earth Summit there. And he brought all the world leaders onto the Royal Yacht Britannia and had a big banquet with the Secretary General of the United Nations, who was Maurice Strong at the time. And they made a plan, basically, to capture the world, to create global governance. And so what happened in 1992 was almost a rerun of what happened in Rio de Janeiro harbour in 1991. So in 1992 we had the Earth Summit. And this chap, Maurice Strong, he's quite an interesting man. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he was a member of the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, the Council for Foreign Relations. He was a member of the Fabian Society. He was a self-confessed communist in ideology and capitalist in methodology. He was exiled to China to avoid prison in the US for being involved in the oil for food scandal, where the UN Security Council made a resolution to supply Iraq with food in exchange for oil. There were revelations of corruption of funds involving Maurice Strong, Adnan Khashoggi, and many other oil billionaires. He was an oil billionaire. He'd worked for the Rockefellers for many, many years. He was really doing their bidding when he was organising the Earth Summit. They'd worked on it for so many years prior to this. He loved China, and he loved the communist system, and he was friends with Chairman Mao, and I think his cousin actually lived with Chairman Mao. So after he was exiled from the US, he went to live in China, and he pulled all the strings from there, and he worked closely with George Soros. This is what he said: the effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound re-engineering of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This is what we're seeing now. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Now, that's so prophetic, because that is exactly what we're experiencing now, where everything that we're looking at now, and I'll be getting onto this with the ESGs and the biodiversity net gain, everything is measured and scored against your social credit, against you as a citizen. Are you a good citizen, or are you working for the environment, or are you working against it? And you will be judged, and your social credit will be assessed on everything that is being measured. And he's almost telling us exactly there what he's doing. Now. At the Earth Summit, they got 178 leaders of countries to sign up to global governance. That's what happened literally in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. They got them all signed up to it, so they agreed to go along with global governance to save the planet. Well, who wouldn't? They were guilt-tripped into it. The planet is dying. They did the whole thing. The planet is dying if you don't sign up to this. So they signed up to literally giving away the resources of the planet to save the planet. In 1995, this was published. It's called the Global Biodiversity Assessment. Now, I have got a copy of this at home. It's very old. I bought it probably about 13, 14 years ago. And it's huge. It's about that big. And it is an inventory of everything on our planet. Every mineral, every animal, every ecosystem, every river, or the seas, what's on the seabeds. It is an absolute analysis. It costs $3.3 billion to produce. And it's really a control and management system for the world. And who's going to control and manage it? They are, the globalists. That's really it. It's private property and farmland are unsustainable. In this it says 75% of the US to be given over to self-willed land and stocked with bears, wolves and wild vegetation. Page 993 of the Global Diversity Assessment has the Wildlands project in it, which is a big map showing that everybody be concentrated in smart cities, and there'll only be corridors in between for military and federal use. And this was a project that was in this Global Diversity Assessment as an example of how this could be actually rolled out all over the world. It said they said the Wildlands project. Yeah, they want to remove 50% of the United States population into urban areas or human settlement zones consisting of high-rise dwellings situated near railway tracks. The railway road will be the main means of transport, private cars to be phased out, and the Obama stimulus was the source of funding for the Wildlands project. By 2030, there are plans to force European farmers, this is in the Global Diversity, to vacate 75 million acres, roughly the size of Poland, under sustainable development. So we're seeing the land grabs now. I mean, it is a monstrous Trojan Horse, Agenda 21. It's a monstrous Trojan Horse to capture all the resources on our planet and to repurpose them for profit for profit. I mean, they've literally sold our planet. This is what the whole financial instruments that I'm going to be talking about. This is how they will do it. Now, after the Earth Summit, they set up something called the International Committee for Local Environmental Initiatives. If you're wondering why your town council aren't working for the people, they're working for the corporations, this is why. Internationally, it was set up to implement Agenda 21 right down from global to local. Italy is now working in all town councils in the UK. It's called something different now. They change it because you cotton onto it, and they don't like using the word Italy now. They call it the town deal, or the new whatever's going on in your town. They call it different things. In our town, we've got the new town deal, where there's money coming in for certain projects which are only green projects, and you know, we're finding that the planning department is not working for preserving nature. It's actually you putting technology on nature and putting it secondary to food production. And I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. So then, obviously, after the Earth Summit, the IPCC was set up, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was all paid for by George Soros to get scientists and universities all paid to come up with the fake science. I mean, this is exactly what Gloria was talking about. All the institutions, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, funding, all the bad guys funding. What, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. They will only come up with the bad science that will promote the outcome that they want. And yeah, then of course in 2009, this is a bit of a timeline. We had Climategate, and it was interesting because, you know, we had. I think it was 179 emails were hacked by the University of East Anglia and the Hadley Research Centre by a US intelligence agency. The content of these emails were damning for the global warming lobby. Michael Mann from Penn State University was encouraging the scientists at these institutions to falsify the data, to hide the decline in real-time temperature and data, and alter the graphs. The most famous hockey stick graph was one of the lies that came out of Climategate. But the original emails were revealing a massive lie and shoring up the industry of climate change. And, you know, the hockey stick, as you see on that cover there, because there was a book called The Hockey Stick Illusion, he actually made the graph go up and created a hockey stick when in fact it declined, because after 2009, you know, these are 11-year larger cycles that we have in weather, and of course they just trapped that little bit of the graph. When Al Gore did his Inconvenient Truth, they were looking at the tiny section of a bigger graph, which actually has big highs and lows. And at the moment, we're going through a big low in temperature. So you know, it goes like that every 11 years. The sun goes very active, and then it calms down a bit, and it goes very active. And at the moment, there's a big lag as well. So I'm not a scientist, but this you know, there's plenty of them talking about this. Then this is when Agenda 21 became Agenda 2030. It was in 2015. There was a massive, you know, big sort of meeting of people in Rome. President Obama flew, and they launched the 17 goals of Agenda 21. 2030, sorry. They called it 2030 then, because the goals had to be achieved by 2030. So it was a timeline. So 2030 is just Agenda 21, but with a timeline of 2030. So it was quite underreported, but Pope Francis met with President Obama to make his keynote speech to the UN General Assembly on the future of the world and to unveil Agenda 2030. They launched the 17 goals to be achieved by 2030. Back in 1965, John Paul pledged the loyalty of the Catholic Church to the, basically to the United Nations, making the Catholic Church the United Nations servant on earth. Yeah, so before that, they'd actually had 8 goals, and it's good to remember that they fail sometimes, because those 8 Millennium Goals failed, and they then had to launch these because they needed to accelerate it. It wasn't moving fast enough. We'd had Greta Thunberg sort of wagging her finger at us and things like that for a long time, and so I think they do sometimes fail in their plans, so they had to accelerate it at that point. Now, the goals, I'm only going to go through a few because there's not enough time to go through them all, but there are 17 of them, and they're pretty much not what they say they are. It's all inversion, and it really is all about capturing the resources of the world and controlling them, and the people of the world. So goal 1 is end poverty. And this is what they say: poverty alleviation, social protection. The UN solution is AI-enabled digital footprint for credit, mobile money access, blockchain identity solutions to enable economic identities for all and refugees. So the reality is they're going to make everybody equally poor, which is universal basic income for all with fixed amount of carbon credits. Analysis of social credit through digital footprint, and social media, collect data about individuals' habits, behaviours, skills, as used in the Chinese social credit system. And goal 2, end hunger. These are big asks. How they think they can actually alleviate world hunger in the time span of 2030, I just don't know. From 2015 to 2030, it's a huge thing to do. United Nations access for food, improved nutrition and food production security. Low-cost GMO mass-produced food production by Monsanto synthetic proteins, AI sensors and blockchain to eliminate waste, loss in food value chain, smart food storage. But the reality is low-cost GMO mass-produced food production by Monsanto synthetic proteins, insect proteins, no meat or no meat. Well, that's a typo actually, no meat, but it lab-grown meat. They want to push that. All sensors and blockchain to eliminate waste, loss in food value chain, smart food storage, real food replaced with synthetic lab food, your consumption habits recorded onto the blockchain, monitoring sensors in waste bins, storage units and refrigerators. So really, this is what we're seeing now with the takeover of, and I'll be talking about this in depth a little bit later with the food and farming, because all of these goals are being created, the goals are being created by the big corporations to control our food chain, and it won't be nutritious food, it will be lab grown, and it will be horrible. If they have their way, but they won't, obviously, because we're sorting it out, hopefully. Now why can't I do this one? Oh, here we go. There we are. Good health and well-being. The UN say advancing good health for all ages and healthcare services. United Nations predictive, preventative, participatory, genomic medicine for all, smart wearables, virtual healthcare assistants. So this is their idea of what will make us healthy. So the reality is that you'll be diagnosed by an AI bot doctor, if you can see a doctor. At the moment it's on the telephone, but the future is AI diagnosis. Monitoring by AI biometric sensors, DNA collection, data collection. Corporations assign fitness coaches to modify your well-being for productivity. So it's all about making money, isn't it? Your medical records and genetic history tied to blockchain via your ID passport. Now, this is all quite horrible stuff, really. So, as we know, the NHS has been morphed with NHS Digital and NHS Improvement, and they're morphing it into this thing where literally all of your data, all of your health data will be available to the corporations. So they can target you with, if you're eating the wrong things, if you're buying the wrong things in the supermarket, your facial recognition will, link it to your credit card or your whatever they'll have then, but chips or whatever they're doing. But all of this data will go against you if you are, for instance, if you're buying too much meat or too much cake and you've got diabetes or whatever. All of these things will be sanctioned, and they will be looking deep into every single detail of every individual in our world. And data is the new gold. They'll be selling it on to third parties and making profits on it. And that's exactly what they intend to do. Then we've got quality education, I think. Yes, well, there isn't any, is there? So, it's all about reskilling and upskilling for life. Long learning in a gig economy. A gig economy is a bit like, when you used to be a rock band and you do gigs, you don't have a proper job. You just go from one thing to another and you're freelance. You don't have job security. A gig economy is a labour market that relies heavily on temporary and part-time positions filled by independent contractors and freelancers rather than full-time permanent employees. Education will be remote, on lifelong training in STEM, as we know, Gloria mentioned, the science, technology, engineering and mathematics, accredited with blockchain micro badges and credentials, social reputation and score, children's outcomes to be determined from birth and AI guided biometrically. I mean, this is a real problem because in schools, the technology is such that they can actually read children's emotions and reactions. Something called SEL learning is being introduced into schools. It's social and emotional learning. And Michael Bloomberg, who's part of the C40 Cities plan, has got surveillance. He's invested in surveillance companies for schools so that they can actually assess these children and bet on their outcomes on the blockchain and sort of it's a bit like trading, sort of on the stock exchange. And the children's outcomes are literally traded. I mean, this is trading humans. It's horrible. I know we've always been traded, but this is really in your face. SEL learning, do look it up, because only a few schools are picking up on this. They're doing it. I've managed to get my granddaughter out of the school she was in Stroud because they were advocating this SEL learning, and they kind of sell it as, oh, it's for their good. You can learn mindfulness, and it's understanding children's emotions and all this sort of thing. But it's not. It's actually. It's sifting out children who are going to be the leaders, who are going to be the ones that fall behind, because they make money on the ones that fall behind, as well as the ones that fit into their military-industrial complex that they're trying to put them in. And so, this is where we have to be very mindful. We have to be very aware. Sorry, I hate that word. We have to be very aware of what is happening with our children. And I actually did. Ian said you must mention your daughter-in-law, because my daughter-in-law weirdly works in a cyber school in Gloucestershire, and these children are actually. Picked out and they're being filtered for GCHQ because they are quite on a spectrum. They're highly intelligent but hyper-focused, usually with technology, engineering, whatever. And this is really heartening, because these kids, they've been filtered into this awful system. And yet they had a PHSE, is it health, sex education class? I can't remember what they call it now. And there was this woman who was advocating sort of the whole LGBTQ agenda. And they walked out, all 32 of them walked out of that class. And she was so proud of her students, because so many of them are questioning, my daughter-in-law, not this woman, because she was, trying to push the whole pronoun thing. And one of the students, now this is quite funny, one of the students said, right, if I identify as a horse, can I have sex with a horse? And she went, oh, that's absolutely not. And he said, well, what's wrong with it? I identify as a horse. And that's when they walked out, because she couldn't argue with it. So
It's all a bit mad, isn't it? Because there are some schools that have, classrooms for the fluffies, the furry ones, and they can dress up with whiskers and they have their own little room that they can go to with litter trays. I mean, and the schools are going along with this, and I find this absolutely ludicrous. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It's insanity beyond insanity. So anyway, let's not dwell on that. So really, I'm trying to push it forward because how this the whole thing with the United Nations has been how they keep this acceleration going, and I just want to say in 2019, obviously, again, it wasn't moving fast enough for them. We'd had Greta really pushing it in England. She'd come to Bristol. She'd been all over the place. And people weren't really getting on board. So they held the Strategic Framework Partnership meeting in Geneva in June 2019 to accelerate the 17 goals. And then straight after that, and of course you've got all the United Nations people, and you had Klaus Schwab and the people from the WEF, and then on 4 months later, they met in New York for Event 201 at the Johns Hopkins Institute, and it was a tabletop exercise, a what-if scenario. What if a novel coronavirus escaped from a wet market in Brazil? It was one of those exercises. It was 3 days. You can still find it online, Event 201. And, of course, added into the mix, they had Bill and Melinda Gates there, who would be only too happy. They'd already patented, with the Purbright Institute, the vaccines in 2017. They were ready to roll all of these, and the whole agenda was pushed and accelerated. Agenda 2030 was accelerated by these events because, as we know, literally after that, beginning in January, even before January, we found that the virus had, suddenly appeared. And it was going all over the world, just like the scenario said it would. And we know what happened after that. And it's been just, this is the way they did it. And while we were sleeping, all the infrastructure went in for ULEZ. All the infrastructure went into our supermarkets, the biometrics, and all of this was put in whilst we were locked up and sleeping. They were out digging up the roads, putting in the cameras, putting in all the infrastructure that was needed, the high speed, and the 5G. The massive 5G stuff was going on during lockdown, and they weren't locked up. They were pushing it all out there. He even admits it, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine and reset our world. How convenient is that? So that's what he must be very happy, this man. Now, I'm just going to go to, because now, they're pushing the whole net zero thing. It's all about climate lockdowns in cities. We've got 15-minute cities. And they're going to go for the climate lockdowns if we don't get Blade Runners and take all that stuff down, which is what we're going to have to do. Unfortunately, I don't want to incite things. I'm being filmed, but anyway, never mind. I don't care anymore. Cut that bit out. I honestly don't care. I mean, I'm just thinking, oh my goodness. Anyway, now this is an interesting document because it's not net zero. This is absolute zero. This was published in fact, I used to talk about this way before lockdown. I say this is what they're going for, absolute zero. It's the UK fires document. Now, this was commissioned by the UK government from Oxford and Cambridge University and some other universities. I think East Anglia, because that's a big climacy one, and I think it was Durham University. I can't remember, but from top universities. To come up with a white paper and a roadmap to achieving absolute zero, not net zero, but absolute zero. And they came up with it and this is it. And you've probably seen it, but I can't really see very well there. But it's from between 2020 and 2029 to reduce the the capacity for airlines to fly out of UK airports. So it's reducing all the airports. So I think it's 3. There's Glasgow, Dublin, and London, or Belfast. Sorry, Belfast and London. And the reduction of to phase out meat production between 2030 and 2049, all airports to close. No airports whatsoever in and out of the UK. No meat or lamb production between 2030 and 2049. So our farming completely destroyed. And really, it's pushing renewables. It's taking out. Building is really hit. It's things like building materials have to be sustainable. So they're getting rid of concrete and all sorts of other things. But there's nothing to sort of like. It really is about the destruction of so much of our life in this. It's unbelievable. So do look it up. It's UK Fire's Absolute Zero document, and it's a roadmap to destruction of society, basically. It's UK Fire's, FIRES, UK Fire's Absolute Zero document. You can find the whole thing. It's quite a big document, and it goes into detail about how they will achieve absolute zero by 2030 or 2050, actually, between 2030 to 2050, absolute zero, and then they've got beyond 2050 where it gets even more dystopian. But it's a big eye opener. And when it came out, I thought, they'll never be able to do that. But actually, it says in there about getting rid of wood burning stoves and gas appliances. It's trying to push us all onto electric. It's taking all the you have to get rid of your. And they're doing this at the moment. They're trying to stop gas boilers being produced. So you've got no gas boilers, no gas cookers, wood-burning stoves to be deemed unsustainable. So no form of autonomous heating at all, or autonomous cooking. Should the grid go down, which could happen at any time because of a Carrington event or whatever. We've got solar minimum going on at the moment. So we could have what's known as a Carrington event, which happened look it up, it's 1859. A lot of people are jumping on that, saying, look, if that happens, if we have another Carrington event, we had one in 1859, because the sun is getting very active. And it could be that they know all this and they're sort of like funneling us into all electric so that they don't have to compete with us. They don't want to compete with 8 billion people on the planet, do they? So I've often pondered, why do they keep pushing this and trying to accelerate it so quickly? And this is a theory that I've had for a while, but with others. And I don't know. I don't want to push that because it's a bit scary, but we'd have a better chance of surviving it if we knew it now and resisted going all electric. That's the only thing. And there might be, if there's any scientists that can back this up. I'm speaking to Valentina Zarkova about all this quite soon, and getting a few scientists together to try and work out, is this what they're doing? I don't know. What do we know? Anyway, the world has gone a bit mad, hasn't it? So, so the 15-minute cities, I mean, these 15-minute cities were not a kind of they weren't something that was new. When they came out straight after lockdown, basically, or during lockdown even, suddenly Oxford, Cambridge, Canterbury, many other cities were sort of carved up into zones, and you couldn't move between them, and all the cars were pushed onto the ring roads and still are causing untold agony for the people living in these cities. Ken Livingstone pushed it in 1999, actually, the whole idea of a 15-minute city. It's part of the C40 cities agenda. And I told you, Michael Bloomberg's, it's a global agenda. It's nothing like a grassroots thing. It's a global agenda. Boris Johnson got together with Michael Bloomberg and Carlos Moreno in 2009 to discuss and set up the 15-minute city idea. And they set up the C40 cities, which Sadiq Khan is the international chairman of. You look at the C40 cities, and it's it really is a form of, this particular, this is the report, The Future, and Mark flagged this up actually in his talk, the future of urban consumption in a 1.5 degree Celsius world. And it's full of totally unrealistic and depressing targets to restrict your lifestyle, virtually to a third world country. Restrictions on diet, they've got something called the planetary diet, where you are allowed the equivalent of a third of a hamburger a week. I think it's something like a cup of milk a week. They've got this idea that they're going to restrict our diets. And they do, they literally want us reduced to a third world country. Restrictions on diet, consumption of all goods. You're allowed only 3 items of clothing to be bought in 1 year, and travel restricted to 1 short-haul flight a year. This is what they have planned. The whole C40 cities thing is pushing this. Now, we've also got the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Emergency. Now, an emergency, usually governments, we've been dealing with this whole, we're all challenging our councils, aren't we? And I did challenge my council about climate emergency because, usually an emergency means that there's a catastrophe. There is no catastrophe, there's no emergency. And it does give, usually an emergency gives Parliament, government powers, extra powers to implement restrictions or whatever. And that's exactly what's happened. But there is no emergency, and we know that. What I'm noticing with the Global Covenant of Mayors is that you're probably aware your councils are going unitary. So they're sort of town and parish councils are being sort of amalgamated into what's called regionalisation. This will result in you as an individual being taken away from all the decision-making process of your former councils. Because it will be further to travel. If you're not allowed to travel, how can you go further to attend your council meetings? And this is what we're seeing at the moment. They'll be governed by the C40 cities. These unitary councils will be governed by the C40 cities Global Covenant of Smart City Mayors for Climate and Energy. They will have the right to impose climate lockdowns without any recourse to the people. And we've got to be careful because these one of my ex-mayors in my town is becoming a global. A global mayor, a smart city mayor, and they're also calling it directly elected mayors to Parliament. This is totally undemocratic. These people will even get rid of our Parliament. Yeah. That's the idea, is that they will get rid of all our stupid politicians who don't understand this. They'll be going. I've spoken to Andrew Bridgen about this. I said they'll all be out of a job, and they deserve it, to be honest. But we don't want these guys getting in. So it's up to us to haul them all out of Parliament and go in ourselves. Sorry, it's another thing you'll have to cut out. Anyway, Now, again, all of the public-private partnerships that are underpinning the whole stakeholder capitalism thing that we're undergoing now. And I will explain about how the land grab's going on and how they're taking money from us and shoring it up by stakeholder capitalism, public-private partnerships. So there's no real the economy is an imagined carbon economy. It's like we've got fiat money at the moment. All of this is imagined, but then they're trading it and making money on it. And it's so hard to get your head around it when you're a normal person who likes to see tangible things, when this is all imaginary. sort of stakeholder capitalism is coming into force. And anybody, I know there's an economist here somewhere, so please bear with me because I'm not an economist, but I'm trying to explain it. Public-private partnerships via NGOs are undermining politics and all Western government. It's like an oligarchy. These extremely powerful multinationals have the ability and are taking over national governments globally to create global governance driven by greed, corporate structure, and undermine everything. It's almost the Russian-Chinese form of corporate communism, which is commutarianism. But it's a very strange mixture of communism and capitalism being merged together. And this was Maurice Strong's, dream when he set up the Earth Summit, because he was a communist by ideology, but a capitalist in methodology. And that it's a fusion of the two. And it's a new kind. And if anybody really wants to get their head around communitarianism, because I've read the most amazing book quite a while ago, and it's called Our Common Destiny, and it's the anti-communitarian manifesto, and it's written by two American ladies, highly intelligent, really insightful, and they were called Nikki Rapana. And that's Nikki, Nikki, Rapana, Raapana, and her daughter, Nordica Friedrich. I'm sure you can spell that. But anyway, they spent all their lives trying to expose this communitarian agenda and understanding that communitarian law was underpinning the EU, and this is how we've got a lot of our, our laws are actually, what's going on. This takeover, this Marxist takeover of every infrastructure in our country came through the EU communitarian law, and it's very important that we're aware of this. And unfortunately, Nikki died way too young a couple of years ago, and she knew Rosa Corey, who was a great inspiration to me, but unfortunately she did say that Rosa plagiarised some of her work, so I don't know. But her daughter Nordica is still alive, and they are still selling the anti-communitarian manifesto online, so do have a look. So that's public-private partnerships and communitarianism. So where are we now? Let's have a look. Now I'm going to talk about environmental and social governance scores. Most businesses now are having to comply to these. They're called ESGs, and this is a way of destroying small businesses, basically. So you have to in order to be complying to sustainable development, you have to jump through hoops, and you have to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes, that you're being environmentally correct, you're being socially correct, that you're using all the right pronouns, that you've got equal opportunities. With the environmental thing, it's making sure that you're even responsible for your staff getting to work, in a green way. They should be cycling to work. They should be, doing all these, what are you providing at work to facilitate them to be more environmentally aware? So, you've got your carbon intensity, your carbon footprint will be measured, and you'll be sanctioned if you don't come up to scratch. And these will become more and more draconian. This is the way they capture us. This is the way that they take the businesses, they take the land. The land's a different one, actually. And then we've got the whole social thing. You have to, and some of them are good. Not to make sure that people aren't using child labour, but it's always peppered with good things so that you think it's all good. Equal opportunities, health and safety, human rights. It all sounds very good, but actually underneath it, there's an agenda that will push it in their favour. Then there's governance, business ethics, compliance, board independence, executive compensation, And they call it shareholder democracy. It's not, because it's shored up by public-private partnerships. And then in our own homes, we've got energy performance certificates and retrofitting. So we've all got to come up to scratch with, if you've got an old house, you will have to pay from your own pocket to retrofit it, to get it up to standard. And your EPC, you won't be able to buy or sell or rent out your house if it's not energy compliant to their standards. So it's another tax, it's another carbon tax on all of us. And with land, this is where I'm going to come into the farming, because farming is, we're in crisis in farming, and we've really got to be aware of this and be aware where it's going, because we are in trouble. Now, natural asset corporations, natural asset classes, and natural asset companies as well, these are all part of the whole natural asset thing, which is the financialisation of nature, and how they're going to own nature and sell, and to be able to trade it. And to reduce your access to nature and your access to the land. So really, it's in 2023, a new financial instrument was created by the Securities and Exchange Commission at the request of the New York Stock Exchange. Natural asset companies, natural asset classes, and corporations are based on environmental stewardship. NACs hold the rights to ecological performance. These companies will be given license to control lands, both public and private, and will be required not to conduct any unsustainable activities, such as meat production, dairy farming, that lead to the degradation of the ecosystems, or anything that is unsustainable in their eyes. So these companies would somehow seek to profit from land without using the land. Whatever they do, it must be sustainable. And this is how the PPPs work, the public-private partnerships work. So how does a company take control of land and make it profitable while not using it? It's very confusing. They profit from ecological performance, such as conservation, restoration, or sustainable management. The NACs, natural asset corporations, would quantify and monetize these natural outputs using a system called Biodiversity Net Gain, or BNG, another acronym. It's a bit like using the air that you breathe or any resource as a crypto or fiat currency. These natural assets that would normally belong to all of us would now belong to corporations run by what many would call environmental special interests. So it's like creating a new currency, and the IMF and the World Bank are all involved in this. They've set up sort of vectors to create this whole system of, it's carbon taxing you on your land. So you will have to come up with, at the moment, I've been talking to quite a few farmers in Somerset, and some of them said, well, this man came round from DEFRA, and DEFRA are all part of this. And, the farmers are having their subsidies taken away. Their normal common agricultural policy subsidies are being replaced by the sustainable, what's it called? The sustainable incentive, something incentive, I can't remember what it is. Yeah, the sustainable farming incentive, thank you. And over 3 years, their subsidies will be cut completely if they don't set up businesses on their land that have nothing to do with growing food. Now, what does that tell you? So, if you look at this, there's things like you can biodiversity offset, carbon sequestration, soil fertility. You can have, now it says there, sort of ecosystems and processes that go down into the land asset. But most of the farmers are being told, you must get rid of your cows, you must get rid of your sheep. And the best thing you could do to actually bring up your score is to put photovoltaics on your land, or wind farms, or use housing, have housing development on your land. And when I looked at the one particular farmer said, look at the North Somerset mapping for from now until I think it's 2049 or 2050 something, and sure enough, the whole of the land, the prediction was the whole of the land to be taken up with photovoltaics and wind farms and housing development. And you know, they were told, these farmers were told, well, you could set up forest schools and foraging on your land. You can give a couple of fields over to wild, you know, rewilding, herbal lays, because at the moment they said they need 20% of that revenue to go towards biodiversity. But that could change, you know, that could change at any point. But the thing is that their not natural ways of making money are being destroyed. Oh, should we have questions at the end, maybe? Yeah, that'd be good, yeah. So, this farmer was particularly concerned because he's got a herd of cattle and he's got sheep, and that's basically it. And he said, well, what am I supposed to do? And they said, well, you can set up dog walking paddocks. This is a big thing. I mean, what's going to happen? Why do we need dog walking paddocks with key codes on? You know, this is all a bit odd. So there's a lot of very strange things. And he said, oh, you can do foraging courses and you can do glamping. Glamping, you know, yeah, all these people can come and have nice holidays on your land, and that would be good. But his main way of earning a living is being stripped away. And that's happening to a lot of farmers, and that's why they're all giving up. A lot of them are giving up because they can't do it. And big corporations are buying up the farms at the moment. You've got British Airways buying massive swathes of land to offset their carbon footprint, and you've got many big corporations and businesses. Big corporations are buying up all the farms and taking all the land because they can make money out of this weird currency they're creating. So biodiversity net gain, you know, there's a mitigation hierarchy of it. You know, you can avoid, where possible, habitat damage should be avoided. Well, we don't want habitat damage, do we? But then there's things like where possible, where possible, habitat damage loss should be minimised. Well, that's where possible, any damage or loss of habitat should be restored. It all sounds very worthy, but when you realise that they're trying to destroy, there's no provision in any of the planning that I'm looking at in town councils at the moment. There's no provision for food security. It's all about environmentalism. It's all about putting renewables on the land. There's no provision for food security. And I've challenged my council with this, and I know Rachel has in Council Watch, you know, Colchester Council. I think everybody should maybe set up their own council watch and challenge your council, because the planners are not taking into consideration food security, and farmers are giving up. And what's going to happen when we don't have any food? You know, this is the thing, and we've had many challenges. I mean, this is the Economist, and the Economist always do this. They predict things, don't they? And you know, they've got skulls on the weeds and everything. Yeah, it's horrible, isn't it? So they're saying the coming food catastrophe. Well, you know, they're telling us what they're going to do. And you know, we've had so much rain. I mean, at the moment, hang on, what does that? Yeah, farmers are saying that we're heading for a massive food shortages worldwide. This will be blamed on climate change, of course. The UK have had so much rain that there will be no planting this year, with supply chains breaking down internationally and the net zero policies preventing farmers from farming food. We have a perfect storm for a famine, because we've got the food supply breaking down with the war in Ukraine and all these manipulated wars, and you know, the bridges, you know, being suddenly ships going into bridges all over America. I mean, what's the chances? But you know, all of this is actually to break up the food chain, and being able to move food around. And I think they're trying to do this, and this is why we've really got to be careful and not buy into, try and get farmers to hang on to their land, if we can. I mean, I know there's a lot of Somerset farmers that want to hang on to their land. This is the worst crop failure this year since World War II in the UK because of the rain. We're going to have, nobody's able to plant anything at the moment. There's very little food production going on because of the weather, and that's engineered as well, as we know. So, and it's happening worldwide. The same thing's happening in India, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. They're having problems with weather, whether it's too hot or too wet or too cold. It's, there's a worldwide thing going on. It's like a perfect storm to create a Holodomor, Holodomor is what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution. And it's the same, in my view, it's the same people behind the whole blooming thing. Anyway, I won't go on to that. Farmers worldwide, they're protesting. The Dutch, and different things have upset different countries. In Holland, it's the fertiliser, and with us, it's the subsidies being taken away. India, land seizures, and France, it was the tariffs, and the UK, we've just had everything thrown at us. Really, it's weather, and it's impossible to farm and make it work financially, and that's by design, absolutely by design. Now I just want to show you a couple of, this was a really interesting report that I stumbled across in 2020, just before the lockdown. And it's the Agricultural Productivity Working Group. If you're interested, make note of all these, because it's worth going through this. I went through it with a fine-tooth comb, and it was quite horrible. It was quite I found it quite dystopian, because they were talking about robotic farming and how you need to the farming will be taken over by robotic farming, and 5G, all the big agri farms, and they were trialling it in Somerset, the agri farms, 5G farms, and I was very disturbed to see cows wearing 5G collars in Somerset. These poor cows, and they were geo-fenced, these cows. They didn't need to put them in a field, because when they got to a border, something would happen to trigger an uncomfortable something that would stop them from going any further. And that's kind of, well, we know what geofencing is going, what that can do. So so these poor cows, they would actually be told by the 5G collars when, if they feel when they need to be milked, and cows often need to be milked at different times, and so they would go, when they were ready, to the milking parlour. They wouldn't need to be herded together, and they'd go and get themselves milked in a automated milking parlour. So these cows were completely controlled by this 5G collar thing, and it was awful. And so this was all talked about in there, that the 5G, all the farms would not be in the hands of hereditary farmers anymore. They wanted farmers. It would be technology driven. So the ability, and this has happened with tenant farmers. They've now stopped, the tenant farmers from being able to hand down their tenancy to their children and their children's children, because the corporations want them back, and they've been taking the tenant farmers' land away in order to create these big technological farming facilities. And they also talk about insect biomass in this report, to create insect biomass, so a replacement protein for everyone. And what else was in there? Oh yes, a lot of things about sort of skill sets, and how traditionally, in their view, farmers weren't educated enough. They had to go. Farmers work with nature. I mean, they're the custodians of our land. You know, they've been doing it for hundreds of years, some of them. And you know, to say that they're not qualified to farm is a nonsense, and that you have to get these STEM educated technophobes running our food supply is absolutely ridiculous, and this is what they want to do. Sorry if this is all depressing, but
You finished it.
sorry.
I kicked it off with all this depression.
You did.
You're rounding it up.
So I mean, obviously, do look at this. It really goes into how, you know, sort of farmers have to go to university to learn the technical, you know, the robotics and the 5G and how it all works, and they have to, you know, get degrees in all this stuff in agri-farming, in big tech agri-farming. And there won't be normal farms, you know, normal farmers who hand it down to their children, who work with the land and understand seasons and nature and everything else. This will be something very, very different. And it won't be healthy food either. And this is their sort of, agriculture has become a solution to many environmental challenges, using the technology and practice a range of new methods of reusing farm byproducts as minimised waste. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing. They're minimising waste, but at what cost? You know, we're going to be putting all this over to basically to technology. The recommendations outlined in this report can bring this vision to life. Figure 1 paints a visual picture of how the industry could look if we get it right. And I don't really understand some of these mind maps. I mean, they're just, it's you know, they're talking about best practice uptake. I mean, it's language we don't really understand. Targeted training, world-leading knowledge exchange, automatic data benchmarking and analysis. So everything is going to work like a finely tuned machine. There won't be anything natural about all of this. It's just going to be robotic field work, they're calling it. You know, automated animal monitoring, you know, world-leading productivity, automated grazing management, I mean, automated feeding, robotic field work, precision input, automated crop monitoring. Everything's automated and works in a very dystopian way, anyway. And obviously it's all got to be sustainable. Now, this is another document that I did look through, the Path to Sustainable Farming and Agricultural Transition Plan 2021 to 2024. This came out in 2021, and this was the way they presented it to farmers. This is what a lot of the farmers were given this report to explain that their subsidies were being cut from the Common Agricultural Policy to the sustainable farming incentives, which they're not incentives at all. It's literally putting their hand behind their backs and saying, you've got to do this. So, and it's quite a long document. It talks about all the reasons for this whole, everybody's got to be doing everything sustainably. Otherwise, their land will be they'll be sanctioned, or they'll have to give up their land if they can't, meet these targets of not growing food. I mean, it's absolutely mad. So yeah, that's another thing. And then, of course, in the background, we've got Sainsbury's. They've got their Future of Food report, which is from 2025. To 2169, basically, and how what food will, how will they do this? And so big corporations, the big supermarkets will be trying to create their own food. So there'll be big corporations taking over the land and producing food as well, but they'll be in competition with people like Sainsbury's, and I think Tesco are doing this as well, who set up their own food production, and it's and it's all about net, keeping it to net zero. So I've got a little bit about the Sainsbury's food. Here we go. Yeah. The struggle for fair price from supermarkets, were the main debate in Westminster Hall on the 22nd of January. The debate was triggered by a petition signed by more than 100,000 people calling for the government to amend the grocery supply of code of practice to protect farmers from unfair behaviour by supermarkets. This is why they want to squeeze out the farmers, because they want to do it themselves. And as you can see, it's 3D printed meat. It's protein from jellyfish. They think that's a good way of feeding us, is jellyfish, and of course you've got the bugs up there. It's all pretty vile. Our farmers are the key drivers of the rural economy. They're also the custodians of our natural environment. We must therefore ensure, I wrote this, that they get the fair deal for the work they do and the food they supply. A poll showed that 88% of the public think it's important that farmers are paid fairly for their work, and they would even pay a little more if they knew the money went to support British farming. Research from Sustain showed that farmers receive less than 1 penny in the pound of the profit they produce, and that 49% of British fruit and veg farmers fear they will go out of business within the next 12 months, with 3/4 of them stating that supermarkets' behaviour is a significant factor. If we drive family farms out of business, they will be replaced with larger industrial farms that will be less entrenched in our communities. This could result in government-run super farms run by robotics, as in the APGW report that I just put up, the Agricultural Working Group, or simply outsourcing the food supply to supermarkets, cutting out farmers altogether. Sainsbury's recently launched its Future Food Report, which predicts the role of food in our lives from 2025 to 2169. This report is predicated on climate change net zero narrative to take action to safeguard our planet. And so this is what Sainsbury's reckon. By 2025, and that's next year, the foods we eat will become planet-friendly. And this also links up to Bloomberg's planetary diet, in the C40 cities. 1/4 of us will be vegetarian or vegan, up from 1 in 8 Britons today. And half of us will identify as flexitarians. Up from 1/5 today. As a demand for plant-based food soars, the grocery aisles will need to adjust. Hydroponically grown plants are expected to revolutionise the meaning of fresh, and we'll see a proliferation of plant-based meat alternatives. Jackfruit is predicted to become a popular meat substitute, as well as mushroom-based products. Algae, milk, seaweed, caviar and insects, crawly things that are already making their way onto our shelves. Just check out Eat Grub's range of protein-packed edible insect snacks. So with the planet heating up, allegedly, what's in store for 2050? Cultured meat will be a grocery staple. They say global population is expected to reach 9 billion people by 2050, even though we're not at replacement level in Europe yet. It will not be sustainable to produce and consume the same quantities of meat that we currently do. This is what they're saying. The report anticipates that cellular proteins, the meaty tissue cultivated independently from animals using stem cells, will reduce the need for farmed animals and consequential greenhouse gases. By 2050, the application may expand to eggs, milk and gelatin. Our oceanic diet will expand. Expect to be served up lesser eaten species like porgy, dogfish, lionfish and barramundi. And we're also likely to be given a sort of overlooked nutrient sources and invasive species such as jellyfish and seaweed. By 2169, to leave some element to the imagination, this snapshot will require some further reading. In the meantime, here's a teaser. Chips embedded in our skin, robots managing farms, and food consumption becoming an immersive, all-sensory experience. The fact is that the World Economic Forum and the UK government are impoverishing farmers by design. Under the false claims of net zero, they want to take over your land by bankruptcy. They aim to make you surplus to requirement. They are creating alternative systems to feed the people with a planetary diet, which will lead to an unhealthy population and corporate control. It's all about corporate greed over people.
Sandi, can you...
Yeah, I'm winding it down now. No, this is the end of it. So, and that's it. that's what they want to do. They've told us, so that is it. And thank you very much for listening. The lady that put her hand up.
I was going to say something positive. The dodecahedrons that can transmute the energy of the chemtrails, and we're starting to make them down in North Devon.
Yeah.
And that can change the weather.
And Switzerland and Portugal as well.
That's right.
Well,
It comes from them.
Yeah.
The Portuguese.
That's fantastic. You know, I mean, I know my stuff is really heavy, and I wouldn't be doing it. I probably would have jumped off Beachy Head by now if I didn't think that there was a way out of this. Because, to be honest, you know, we're facing the worst challenges that humanity's ever faced. I'm sorry, and what's good is that there's good things happening in other countries that are throwing out the WEF. I mean, I know there's a couple of states in America, Alabama and Texas, have thrown out the WEF, and Sweden are doing a big turnaround with the WEF and all of that stuff. So if anybody's got any really good stories, talk about it in the pub, because I do believe that we are winning this. But more people are waking up. It's not for nothing. We've just got to keep chipping away. Never give up. Never give in. Just keep on.
There's the Road to Geneva convoy organised by
Dan. Yes.
13th to 15th of May.
Lovely.
It's going to be a big convoy from this country. Anyone can join it. And
Perfect.
the website, I think it's www.roadtogeneva.com.
Lovely. Yeah.
And we'll be there.
Well, I'll try and get there too.
Patrick, you were going. He's going too.
Great. No, that's good. No, we've got good people on our side. Which lady? This lady?
Well, I have several questions, if that's all right, and hopefully they're brief ones. The first one, where you mentioned 1991, the first global revolution, the book where they invented global warming.
Yeah.
Who are they?
They are it was commissioned by the United Nations via the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome are the think tank for the United Nations, and their whole sort of ideology or methodology is that it's a crisis think tank to come up with global solutions for global crises. And the Club of Rome, it's been going for a long time. It was created by the United Nations. Yeah.
But I think a lot of these things are very nuanced. I mean, I'm a great admirer of the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of what they're seeking to achieve. And to say that the entire organisation and everyone working in it is part of a conspiracy, I think is disrespectful of a lot of people who will be working with good objectives and honourable objectives in mind. I'm afraid, it is the nature of humanity that things are very nuanced. Things get distorted, particularly where they're driven by money. One of my other questions, I share your concerns about food security. I'm a farmer's daughter, but that's a long time ago, but I'm the voluntary secretary of a local farming group which is looking at ELMS, environmental land management schemes, and those people actually are trying to reinvigorate nature. And in fact, I heard from a vet over the weekend who's married to a farmer, and I haven't looked into this, that they put a cap of 25% on the amount of land where some of the schemes apply. So there is a farming group coming up soon. And that to me seems to be that the government is waking up to the fact that it is not just about nature, because it's neglected nature, for many years, and uprooting hedges and everything else, and they're now backtracking. But actually, there is a real sense about that, and I think they are waking up to the fact that food security is a big issue. I don't know where the government's land use framework has got to, And there are many complicated issues. And again, they're probably waking up to the fact that, you know, there does need to be a sensible strategy looking at how top-grade farming land is used in the future. The final question, and those are comments. You know, you say the weather is engineered. I mean, I've been speaking to Kenson's Farm recently. They're organic farmers. Belle knows them well. I've bought my veg there for the last 14 years, and I've been asking them, well, how is the land, you know, how's the weather pattern been changing? And do you think climate change is, I wouldn't say untrue, but, you know, I said people are questioning that climate change is happening, and what's your response to that? I'm quite perplexed. And, you know, from a growing perspective, it is getting more, you know, the seasons seem to be much more variable and much more challenging. And you're saying, and you highlighted in your slide, you showed, you know, this year we're heading for maybe food shortages due to the torrential rain. Well, what do you think is causing the torrential rain and the disruption of the normal seasonal patterns that farmers have experienced for many years?
Well, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm just seeing what's happening, and that we do. I mean, you're absolutely right about. I just want to address your first thing about, you know, there's good people out there with the ELS schemes, and there's a lot of good people. And don't get me wrong, there's good people in the United Nations. There's good people everywhere. But I'm talking about the drivers of all of this policy, all of these policies from the. I mean, the very fact that Maurice Strong and David Rockefeller and Edmund de Rothschild thought up the Earth Summit, and they did want global governance. There were whistleblowers at that conference and were working behind the scenes who heard what their plans were going to be. And the thing is that there are good people everywhere. And I'm not talking about, I mean, there's good people in my community who are setting up growing schemes and really, you know, sort of, you know, food hubs and growing projects. And this is all very good because we do have to bring it to a community level to a degree, so long as it's not controlled, you know, by any corporates. You know, we have to keep it autonomous because, you know, I mean, you must be aware of what they talk about at Davos. You know, they fly in their jets. You know, there's nothing that they do that is in any way sustainable. None of the stuff that Davos, you know, you might be aware of the World Economic Forum and the many meetings they've had at Davos for the last, well, since the 1970s.
So, yes.
They make all the decisions about what's going on in our world.
That may be so, and the world has always been, you know, corrupted and you know, things that are good and bad and vested interest. It's the nature of humanity. But asking about climate change and to say, because of your concerns, and it's good to listen to the concerns, but to say that climate change is an invented phenomenon.
Well, let's just take the term climate change. Let's just take climate change. It used to be called global warming. And why did it change? Because the planet stopped warming. That's why it changed. At the Earth Summit, it was called global warming. And they made outrageous claims about how hot we were going to get. And if you look, it's the sun that drives everything in our solar system. There's, if you like, there's global cooling and global heating going on in our solar system. It is not anthropogenic, and that's my argument. Is that yes, we've got climate change. The climate has changed all the time on our planet, all the time. It's changed in the solar system all the time. That's the science, the real science. But it's not fueled by anthropogenic global warming, and that's where it's all gone horribly wrong.
So what's changing? This variability in the seasons. And I have to say that not everyone agrees with you.
No, I'm sure, I'm very aware that not everybody agrees with me because the whole world, as you know, tends to have bought into the whole narrative that's been pushed for many, many years. And do you want to have a word about this?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is very much in favour of the IPCC flavour of global warming. And he said to me, will you come on my podcast and discuss it? This was a year or two ago. And he said, I'd like to discuss taking stock. And we had a good conversation, and I said to him, well, if we were taking stock, we should look at what that first predictions were. We should look at the climate models, go back 40 years. I'm old enough to remember the 1970s, when this global warming started, and we were environmentalists in those days in a very different way. And I said to him, well, look at the different things. What happened? We were told 10 years and we would be underwater in our coastal cities. That was in the 70s. Didn't happen. Then they said the same thing in the 80s, then the same thing in the 90s, and so it's gone on. Every time they put a new model up, has it worked? And that's, we need to look at the predictions that were made and say, did it come true? Was it better? Was it worse? And then we can make another proper judgment based on whether that came true. And so far as I can see, there's very little of those models that have ever been assessed, looked at, looked back, and the predictions and the actuality. That would be my first thing. And the second thing I would say is the climate, you can't lump global climate because it's different all the way round. You know, every single country is going to be different. So we can't have a global, it's not going to be the same all around the globe. It's impossible. It's way too complicated.
Can I just have a word?
And we are going to have to finish very
Can I just say
quickly,
one
otherwise
more
we
thing?
have to pay more money for the hall.
Can I just say one thing, because you said about weather manipulation, you were quite sceptical. I don't know if any of you probably are aware of the incident, the Lynmouth incident that happened in 1952. And the military have been messing about with weather for many, many years. And in August 1952, some pilots set off from I think it was RAF Lynham or somewhere like that, and they were given a mission. Now this was on the BBC because it was 50 years since then. The pilot, one of the pilots, was still alive. He was in his 80s or 90s, I think. And he told the story of they were given orders. They were going to create rain, and they flew from the airbase. And they dropped silver diode and silver diode and something else into ice, into clouds, and they created rain. And they were so happy. They got back to the airbase. They were all high-fiving each other. We did it. We made rain, and the mission accomplished. What they didn't realise that in Lynmouth, it created 7 years of rain to fall in half an hour. It washed the entire village away. And 35 to 40 people died and were injured. And then it was all hushed up. Now, they haven't stopped playing with the weather since, and they can do whatever they like. So look up the Lynmouth disaster of 1952, because it's moved on from there. There's various companies, and if I wasn't being filmed, I'll tell you the name of them, who are actually doing this. So, anyway.
And I think you'll find that Mr. Gates is very proud that he's seeding aluminium to reflect the sun back into the stratosphere again. He's very public about that.
It's on geoengineering.gov.
Geoengineering, yeah.
Solar radiation management.
And Lyndon Johnson said, he who controls the weather controls the world.
Yeah.
And that was in his presidency.
Yeah.
And we never used to have chemtrails until the 90s. We used to have blue skies. We had massive chemtrails today.
I'd love to take the conversation
to the pub.
maybe to the pub.